I never imagined I would be fighting for my own home after my dad passed away. As a software engineer at 29, I thought I had my life figured out. But that changed when my stepmother, Susan, who married my dad when I was 15, sent me a text that made my blood boil. After my father died of a heart attack 2 months ago and left the house to me in his will, Susan demanded that I pay $1,500 in rent to move back into my own house. Meanwhile, her kids, Tyler and Amanda, continued to live there rent-free. Truer colors had never been shown. Before I tell you this shocking story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe so you do not miss out on my journey of standing up for what is rightfully mine. Growing up, my dad was my rock. After my mom died when I was 10, it was just the two of us against the world. We developed a routine and understanding that made our small family unit work perfectly. Dad was a high school math teacher who somehow always made time for basketball games in the driveway and weekend fishing trips despite grading papers and planning lessons. Those 5 years alone with him were some of the best memories of my life. Everything changed when he introduced Susan to me. I was 15 when they started dating and 16 when they got married. Susan worked as a real estate agent and always talked about her keen eye for property value. She had 2 children from her previous marriage, Tyler and Amanda, who were 12 and 10 at the time. From the beginning, fitting into this new family dynamic was challenging. Susan tried to establish herself as the new authority figure in the house immediately. She rearranged furniture, repainted walls, and changed house rules without consulting me. Dad seemed so happy with her that I kept my frustrations to myself. I wanted him to be happy after years of raising me alone, so I swallowed my objections and tried to make it work. Tyler and Amanda were another story entirely. They were treated like royalty from day one. They got new phones while I had to save up for mine. They received driving lessons from professional instructors while I had to learn from my dad in parking lots. Small inequalities built up over time, creating a clear division in the house. Susan constantly intervened in my relationship with my dad. If we planned a fishing weekend, she would suddenly schedule a family event. If we were discussing my college plans, she would interrupt with her opinions about where I should go and what I should study. The private moments with my father became increasingly rare. By the time I turned 18, I was ready for college and the freedom it would bring. I chose a university 4 hours away, not just for its engineering program, but for the distance it put between me and the tension at home. During holidays and occasional weekends, I would visit, but those visits became shorter and less frequent as the years went on. After graduation, I accepted a job in Austin, putting even more distance between us. Dad and I stayed close through phone calls and occasional visits, but Susan, Tyler, and Amanda became more like distant relatives I saw at holidays rather than family. 2 months ago, I received the call that changed everything. My dad had a massive heart attack while at work. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. He was only 56 years old. The grief hit me like a physical blow. Dad was healthy, active, and had just started talking about early retirement plans. We had been discussing a father-son fishing trip to Alaska next summer, something he had always wanted to do. Now those plans were gone, along with the one person who had always been there for me. I took emergency leave from work and drove straight home. The funeral was a blur of faces and condolences. Susan organized everything, barely consulting me on arrangements for my own father. She chose a church Dad never attended and a closed casket despite knowing he would have wanted an open one. I was too numb to fight about it. 3 days after the funeral, we met with the family lawyer for the reading of the will. I expected the house to be left to Susan since they had been married for 14 years. To everyone's surprise, especially Susan's dad, had left the house to me with a note explaining it was my childhood home and he wanted me to have it. Susan received his retirement account, which was substantial, but clearly not what she had expected. The lawyer explained that Dad had updated his will 6 months earlier, something Susan apparently had not known. The moment the lawyer finished, Susan stormed out, followed by Tyler and Amanda, both shooting daggers at me with their eyes. That night, Susan confronted me in the kitchen. Her face was red with anger, as she accused me of manipulating my father into changing his will. "I have spent 14 years in this marriage, making this house a home," she hissed. "And now you swoop in and take it all." "I did not know about the will change," I replied honestly. Dad never mentioned it to me. She did not believe me. Tyler and Amanda joined in calling me selfish and greedy. Rather than escalate the situation during a time of mourning, I made what I now realize was a mistake. I told them they could continue living in the house while I returned to Austin. I planned to move back in 3 months, when my lease ended, and we could figure out arrangements then. They seemed mollified by this temporary solution. I returned to Austin, buried myself in work to distract from my grief, and began making plans to relocate back to my hometown. Then, exactly 6 weeks after Dad's death, I received a text from Susan that left me stunned. Starting next month, you will need to pay $1,500 in rent for your room if you want to move back. This is non-negotiable. I called her immediately, thinking there must be some mistake. The conversation that followed was tense and surreal. Susan, the house belongs to me now. Why would I pay rent to live in my own house? I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. Because I am the woman of this house, she replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I have been maintaining it, paying the utilities, and keeping it running. If you want to live here, you contribute. When I asked if Tyler and Amanda were also paying rent, her response was telling. They are my children. Of course they do not pay rent. And I am not. I asked, the hurt evident in my voice. You are an adult with a good job. Tyler is still finishing his master's degree, and Amanda just started her career. They need support. You do not. But it is my house, I repeated, still unable to believe the conversation was happening. A house I helped pay for through my marriage to your father, she snapped back. I have earned my place here. I hung up my hands, shaking with anger and confusion. The unfairness of the situation was overwhelming. The house my father had explicitly left to me was being held hostage, and I was being asked to pay for the privilege of claiming what was legally mine. After that shocking conversation with Susan, I needed some perspective. I called my best friend Jason that night, pacing around my apartment, as I recounted the absurd demand. She wants you to pay rent. In your own house. Jason's incredulous voice mirrored my disbelief. That is next-level entitlement, man. I do not know what to do, I admitted. I do not want to throw them out on the street, but this feels completely wrong. Jason did not hesitate. You need a lawyer, Kenny, like yesterday. This is not just unfair. It might be illegal. She cannot charge you rent for property you legally own. His certainty gave me pause. I had been thinking about this as a family dispute, not a legal one. But Jason was right. This was about property rights. The next day I called my Uncle Robert, my dad's brother. We had always been close, and he had never particularly warmed to Susan either. Your father would be furious, Uncle Robert said after I explained the situation. He left you that house because it was your childhood home, not so Susan could try to profit off you. I feel guilty about potentially making them move, I confessed. Kenny, listen to me. Susan is a grown woman with a career. Tyler and Amanda are adults. Your father provided for Susan in the will with his retirement account. You do not owe them a free place to live at your expense. His words strengthened my resolve. I spent the rest of the day researching property law and confirmed what I already suspected. As the legal owner of the house, I had every right to decide who lived there and under what conditions. My research was interrupted by a call from my childhood neighbor, Mrs. Patel. She had been friends with my parents since before I was born. Kenny, dear, I thought you should know, she said hesitantly. Susan has a man staying at the house. He has been there for about a week now. My stomach dropped. A man like a relative or something. No, dear. I believe it is a boyfriend. They seem quite familiar with each other. I thanked Mrs. Patel for the information, my mind reeling. Not only was Susan trying to charge me rent for my own house, but she had also moved a new man in barely 2 months after my father's death. That weekend, I decided to make a surprise visit home. I needed to see the situation for myself. The 6-hour drive gave me plenty of time to think, to prepare what I would say. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found. I still had my key, so I let myself in on Saturday morning, expecting to find everyone still asleep. Instead, I walked into a house I barely recognized. The living room furniture had been rearranged, and new art hung on the walls. Photos of my father had been removed, replaced by generic landscapes. I headed upstairs to my old room only to find it completely emptied of my belongings. Confused, I checked the other rooms. Tyler and Amanda were in their usual rooms, now redecorated. The master bedroom door was closed, but I could hear voices inside. I found my things in the basement room, which had previously been used for storage. My boxes were stacked haphazardly, and my bed had been replaced by an old futon. My basketball trophies, which had been displayed in my room since high school, were carelessly tossed in a box, one broken at the base. Still processing this discovery, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Susan appeared at the basement door, her expression shifting from shock to defensive anger. "Kenny, what are you doing here? You cannot just barge in without warning. This is my house." I reminded her, struggling to keep my voice steady, and I found my things dumped in the basement. "Care to explain?" "We needed your room for Mark," she said, crossing her arms. "The basement is perfectly fine for when you visit." "Who is Mark?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "My friend. He needed a place to stay, so I offered him your room since you are not using it." "Your friend? You mean your boyfriend, who moved in less than 2 months after my father died?" Her face flushed. "How I move on with my life is none of your business. Your father would want me to be happy." I pushed past her and went upstairs, where I encountered a man coming out of the master bedroom, my parents' bedroom, wearing only pajama pants. He looked about Susan's age, with a smug expression that instantly set me on edge. "You must be the son," he said, not extending his hand. "Susan has told me all about you. And you must be Mark, the man sleeping in my father's bed," I replied coldly. Mark laughed. "Well, it is. Susan's bed now is not it. And I guess technically your house, though Susan says that was just your dad being sentimental. She did all the real work on this place." Before I could respond, Tyler and Amanda appeared, clearly awakened by the commotion. Both glared at me as if I was an intruder. "What are you doing here?" Amanda demanded. "Checking on my house," I answered, my patience wearing thin, "and finding out my room has been given away, and my things thrown in the basement." Tyler smirked. "You are never here anyway, and Mom said you will be paying rent soon, so you might as well get the small room." "I am not paying rent," I stated firmly. "This is my house. Dad left it to me." "You are so ungrateful," Susan interjected. "After everything I have done for you, taking care of your father, making this house a home, this is how you repay me. By threatening to throw us out." "I never threatened to throw anyone out," I clarified, "but I am certainly not going to pay rent. In my own property, while you move your boyfriend in and toss my belongings in the basement. You never appreciated this family." Susan continued, working herself into a righteous fury. "Always acting like you were better than us, running off to college and barely visiting. Now, you want to claim this house, like you have been here all along." The argument escalated, with Susan, Tyler, Amanda, and even Mark ganging up against me. They called me selfish, entitled, and disrespectful. Susan went as far as to claim she had saved my father from loneliness and deserved the house more than I did. During the argument, I noticed something missing from the living room. "Where are Dad's fishing trophies? And his vinyl collection?" Susan waved dismissively. "We cleared out some of the clutter. This house needed updating." "Those were not clutter," I said, my voice rising. "Those were his prized possessions. We sold what we could," Amanda admitted, without a trace of remorse. "Nobody listens to vinyl anymore anyway." Feeling sick to my stomach, I started searching the house for my father's belongings. Most were gone. His home office had been converted into a workout room for Mark. His clothes had been donated or discarded. In the garage, I found boxes labeled for donation. Inside one, I discovered a photo album containing pictures of my mother, carefully preserved by my father for years. They had thrown away my mother's memory like it was nothing. As I clutched the album, Mark appeared in the garage doorway. "Looking for more stuff to claim?" he asked snidely. "Susan said your dad was a bit of a hoarder. We have been helping clean things out. My father was not a hoarder, I said through gritted teeth, and you have no right to touch any of his things. Listen, kid, Mark said, though he was only about 15 years. My senior, I get that you are sad about your dad, but life moves on. Susan and I are building a future here, and your hanging on to old stuff is not helping anyone. Building a future, in my house, without my permission, Mark shrugged. Susan says the will thing was a technicality. She put years into this place. You can pay rent like an adult or find somewhere else to live. When I returned inside, the final blow came when I discovered my father's study had been completely emptied. His important papers, which should have been carefully stored, were in disarray. Some appeared to be missing entirely. Where are the rest of Dad's documents? I demanded. I organized what was important, Susan replied evasively. The rest was just taking up space. I noticed Susan's purse on the counter, my father's credit card partially visible in her wallet. Are you still using Dad's credit card? I asked in disbelief. Susan snatched her purse away. I was his wife. I am entitled to manage the accounts during this transition period. That night, I checked into a hotel, too angry and heartbroken to stay in what no longer felt like my home. As I lay awake, scrolling through my phone to find a lawyer, I realized the depth of the betrayal. This was not just about rent or possessions. They were erasing my father's existence and my childhood from that house, all while taking advantage of my good nature and grief. For the first time since my father's death, I allowed myself to fully feel the anger beneath my sadness. I had lost my dad, and now I was losing the last physical connection I had to both my parents. The house that held every important memory of my life was being taken over by people who cared nothing for its history or meaning. I fell asleep, clutching the rescued photo album, determined that tomorrow would bring a change. I would not let them take anything else from me. Monday morning, I woke up with newfound clarity and purpose. I was done being passive. This was my house left to me by my father, and it was time to take it back. I contacted a law firm specializing in estate disputes and secured an appointment that same morning. The lawyer, Miss Rodriguez, listened carefully as I explained my situation. Her expression grew increasingly concerned as I detailed Susan's demand for rent, the boyfriend moving in, and the disposal of my father's belongings. Mr. Fisher, I want to be absolutely clear, she said when I finished. The house is legally yours. Your stepmother has no claim to it whatsoever. She cannot charge you rent. She cannot prevent you from living there. And she had no right to dispose of property inside the home without your consent. So what can I do? I asked. You have several options, but the simplest is this. You can give them formal notice to vacate the premises. In this state, that means 30 days. If they refuse to leave after that time, we can begin eviction proceedings. The word eviction made my stomach twist, but I remembered the photo album of my mother tossed in a donation box, my belongings relegated to the basement, and Susan's boyfriend sleeping in my father's bed. My resolve strengthened. What about the items they sold or threw away? You can potentially sue for the value of those items, Miss Rodriguez explained. Do you have any documentation of what was in the house? Thankfully, I did. My father had been meticulous about home insurance and had digital records of his valuable possessions, including his vinyl collection. I still had access to his cloud storage. While reviewing the documents, Miss Rodriguez noticed something concerning in my father's financial records that I had downloaded. There have been significant withdrawals from your father's checking account since his death, she pointed out, and several large credit card charges. I leaned forward to look at the screen. There were thousands of dollars in purchases at furniture stores, electronics, retailers, and even a spa resort weekend, all made after my father's death. That is definitely fraud, Miss Rodriguez said gravely. We should add this to our case. Armed with legal advice and documentation, I decided to confront Susan one more time before taking official action. I wanted to give her a chance to do the right thing. When I returned to the house that evening, I discovered another unpleasant surprise. Susan and Mark were hosting a dinner party in my dining room. Tyler and Amanda were there with their friends, all enjoying themselves, as if they owned the place. Conversation stopped abruptly when I walked in. Susan recovered quickly, plastering on a smile. "Kenny, I did not know you were coming by. We are just having a little get-together. You remember the Johnsons from down the street?" I nodded politely to the neighbors, but maintained my focus. "Susan, we need to talk. Privately." "We are in the middle of dinner," she objected. "Can it not wait?" "No, it cannot." With obvious reluctance, she followed me to the kitchen. Mark trailed behind, uninvited. "I have consulted with a lawyer," I began without preamble. "This house is legally mine. You have no right to charge me rent, no right to move people in without my permission, and no right to dispose of anything in this house without my consent." Susan's face flushed. "You went to a lawyer against your own family. You are the one who tried to make me pay rent in my own home," I reminded her. "And you have been using my dad's credit cards illegally since his death." Mark stepped forward, his chest puffed out. "Now listen here, you ungrateful little." I cut him off. "I am not talking to you. You have no place in this conversation. In fact, you have no place in this house." Susan's demeanor shifted from defensive to pleading. "Kenny, be reasonable. Where are we supposed to go? This has been my home for 14 years. You have 30 days to find a new place," I said, handing her the formal notice my lawyer had prepared. "All of you. And I want an accounting of everything that belonged to my father that has been sold or discarded. You cannot do this." Susan cried, her voice rising enough that the dinner guests could surely hear. "I was married to your father. I took care of him, and he provided for you in the will I countered. You got his retirement account. The house is mine." By now, Tyler and Amanda had joined us in the kitchen, followed by several uncomfortable-looking dinner guests. "You are kicking us out?" Amanda asked incredulously. "Where are we supposed to live?" "You are both adults with jobs," I replied. "You will figure it out just like other adults do." Tyler stepped toward me aggressively. "You always thought you were better than us. Dad always favored you." "He was not your dad." I corrected him, my patience finally at its end. "He was my dad. And yes, he left his house to me, not to people who would erase his memory the moment he was gone." The dinner party ended abruptly. After that, the guests making hasty excuses to leave. Once they were gone, Susan tried a different approach. "Kenny, I am sorry if we have hurt you. We were just trying to move forward. Grief affects people differently," she said, her voice suddenly gentle. "Maybe we can work something out. You can have your old room back. Mark can move to the basement." I almost laughed at the transparent attempt to manipulate me now that she realized I was serious. "The time for negotiations was before you demanded rent from me, before you threw my things in the basement, before you moved your boyfriend into my father's bed 2 months after his death." During our conversation, I noticed Mark slipping upstairs. Suspicious, I followed him and found him hurriedly gathering papers from a drawer in the master bedroom. "What are you doing?" I demanded. He jumped clearly, not expecting me, just getting some of Susan's things. I stepped forward and saw what he was holding: my father's financial statements and what looked like a half-drafted amendment to his will. "Those are my father's papers," I said, holding out my hand. "Give them to me." Reluctantly, he handed them over. As I scanned the documents, I discovered something that made my blood boil. A draft amendment to my father's will, never executed, that would have left the house to Susan. Based on the notes in the margin in Susan's handwriting, she had been pressuring him to make the change. He never signed it, I noted, looking up at Mark with newfound understanding. She was trying to get him to change the will, but he never did. Mark had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Look, I do not know anything about that. That is between Susan and your dad." I took the papers downstairs and confronted Susan. "You tried to get him to change his will to give you the house. That is why you are so angry, is not it? Because he refused." Susan's face crumpled. "He promised me. We built a life here. Then he got sick and started talking about his legacy and family home. He was not thinking clearly. He was thinking perfectly clearly," I corrected her. "This was always meant to be my house. He wanted me to have it." In that moment, Looking at her desperate, angry face, I saw the truth. Susan had always seen my father as a provider, not a partner. The house had always been her target, and I had been an inconvenient obstacle to her plans. "The 30-day notice stands," I said firmly. "I will be moving in this weekend, and staying in my father's room. Mark needs to be gone by then. I suggest you all start packing." As I turned to leave, Tyler blocked my path. "You cannot just walk in here and take over," he snarled. I looked him directly in the eye. "Actually, I can. This is my house, and I am done letting all of you take advantage of that fact. I will not pay rent to live in my own home, while you all live here for free. That ends now." As I walked out the door, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time since my father's death, I had stood up for myself and honored what he wanted. The house would remain in the family as he intended, and I would not allow anyone to make me feel guilty for claiming what was rightfully mine. The 30 days that followed were not easy. Susan, Tyler, Amanda, and Mark did everything they could to make the transition difficult. They left messes for me to clean up, played music loudly at night, and continued to act as if I was the intruder, but I stood my ground. True to my word, I moved into the master bedroom that weekend. I replaced the new bedding Susan and Mark had bought with my father's old comforter that I found in a storage bin. I hung photos of my parents back on the walls. Slowly, I began reclaiming the space. Mark moved out within the first week, unwilling to deal with the tension. Tyler and Amanda stayed until the very last day, removing fixtures and small items that were not technically theirs, but had been part of the house for years. Susan alternated between cold silence and tearful pleas, but my resolve never wavered. On the final day of the notice period, I returned from work to find them loading the last of their belongings into a moving truck. Susan approached me as I got out of my car. "I hope you are happy," she said bitterly. "You have torn apart what was left of this family." I looked at her calmly. "This was never about family for you, Susan. It was about property and money. Dad saw that in the end, and that is why he protected my inheritance." She had no response to that. With one last glare, she joined Tyler and Amanda in her car and drove away, following the moving truck to their new apartment across town. Standing alone in the driveway, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the conflict was over. Sadness for what my relationship with my father's wife and her children had become. But mostly I felt a sense of rightness. This was how it was supposed to be. The first few nights alone in the house were strange. It was too quiet, too empty. The rooms echoed with memories, some painful but many wonderful. I found myself talking to my father as I moved through the rooms, telling him about my day, or asking what he would think about my plans for renovations. Gradually, I began the process of healing the house and myself. I repainted the rooms that Susan had changed, restoring some to their original colors that my mother had chosen years ago. I tracked down some of my father's vinyl records through online forums, replacing a small portion of his collection. My Uncle Robert and his family were immensely supportive, coming over to help with repairs and joining me for dinner several nights a week. Through them, I reconnected with extended family that I had lost touch with over the years. 6 weeks after Susan and her family moved out, I hosted a small memorial gathering for my father in the backyard. It was nothing formal, just close friends and family sharing stories and memories. We laughed about his terrible jokes, his passion for teaching, and his unwavering dedication to those he loved. That night, sitting on the back porch with Uncle Robert, after everyone had left, I finally felt at peace. "Your dad would be proud of you," my uncle said, sipping his coffee. "Not just for standing up for yourself, but for preserving what mattered to him." "I wish he was here," I admitted. "There is so much I still wanted to tell him. He knew Kenny. Trust me on that. He knew how much you loved him." In the months that followed, I settled into a new rhythm of life in my childhood home. I transferred to my company's local office, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again. The empty rooms began to feel less like echoes of the past and more like space for new beginnings. I decided to rent out 2 of the upstairs bedrooms to a young couple who were saving for their own house. Unlike Susan, I charged them a fair below-market rent. They brought life and laughter back into the house, and we often shared meals and movie nights. 1 year after my father's death, I received an unexpected letter from Amanda. She apologized for her behavior and explained that she had been influenced by her mother's bitterness. We met for coffee, and while we did not become close, we established a civil relationship. Tyler and Susan remained distant, unwilling to acknowledge their role in the conflict. The most important lesson I learned through this experience was the value of standing up for myself. For too long I had allowed Susan and her children to make me feel like an outsider in my own family. I had accepted the small injustices, the gradual erasure, because it seemed easier than fighting. But my father had known better. He had ensured that I would have this tangible connection to my past, this foundation for my future. The house was more than walls and a roof. It was his final gift to me, and honoring that gift meant refusing to let anyone take advantage of my grief or good nature. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with family, or those who claim to be family. Being kind does not mean being a doormat. Being respectful does not mean surrendering what is rightfully yours. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to say no to those who would take without giving, who would demand without appreciating. I still think of my father every day as I move through this house. I feel his presence in the garden he planted, the workshop he built in the garage, the marks on the doorframe that measured my height as I grew. No one can take those connections away, because they live not just in the physical structure but in my heart and memory. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? How did you find the strength to protect what was rightfully yours while navigating complex family dynamics? Share your story in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more real-life experiences that remind us all of the importance of self-respect and healthy boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that ultimately bring the most healing.